When I stepped into the kitchen, my heart began to race. A cold dread settled over me as I saw my husband standing by the counter, preparing a banana smoothie. The look in his eyes, calculated, almost sinister, sent a chill down my spine. His lips curled into a mysterious smile the moment he noticed me, and I froze. That smile wasn't comforting. It was a warning. A week ago, he had done the same thing, setting off a chain of events I could barely endure. Since then, it had become his ritual. Every night before coming to me in bed, he drank that smoothie, a concoction he claimed gave him the strength of 5 men. And it wasn't just words. I had felt the effects firsthand. The nights were unbearable, leaving me physically and emotionally drained, but he seemed utterly indifferent to my suffering. As I lingered at the doorway trying to summon the courage to turn and run, he gestured for me to come closer. His eyes bore into me, expectant and unyielding. I shook my head, hoping he'd let it slide, but his expression darkened instantly. Reluctantly, I stepped forward, my heart pounding. I glanced around, searching for an escape, but there was none. Our marriage was still new, just 2 weeks old, and I was already learning the hard way that my husband was unpredictable. His lack of boundaries unsettled me. Whether we were alone or surrounded by people, he had no shame, often behaving in ways that left me mortified. Yet he seemed oblivious to my discomfort. It was as if shame was a concept foreign to him. As I approached, he grabbed my arm and yanked me forward with such force that I lost my balance. My hand hit the pitcher he'd been holding, and it crashed to the floor, shattering on impact. For a moment, he froze, his mouth agape as he stared at the spilled smoothie pooling at his feet. Inside, I felt a flicker of relief. The thought of enduring another night after he drank that damn smoothie had filled me with dread. Now, with the drink ruined, I felt an unexpected sense of triumph. But I kept my joy hidden, forcing my expression into one of contrition. His face, however, told a different story. His disappointment was palpable, and his eyes were fixed on the mess as though mourning a lost treasure. I stole a glance outside. The storm that had been raging all day showed no signs of letting up. Rain lashed against the windows, and the cold, unforgiving winds howled through the streets. My husband valued his health above all else. He believed that staying fit was essential to keeping me happy, a belief I found ironic, considering I would have given anything for a brief reprieve from his relentless demands. Yet here he was, staring at the ruined smoothie like a man possessed. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Who's responsible for this?" I lowered my head, suppressing the smile threatening to break free. I couldn't let him see it, not now, when his temper was teetering on the edge. If he caught even a hint of my amusement, I knew there would be hell to pay. He glared at me for a few agonizing moments before storming out of the kitchen. My relief was short-lived. As he grabbed his coat and shoes, I couldn't help but ask, "Where are you going?" "To get bananas," he said flatly, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "We're out." My eyes widened in disbelief. The storm outside was ferocious, the kind of weather no sane person would venture into unless absolutely necessary, and yet he was willing to brave it for a bunch of bananas? It was madness. "You can't go out in this weather," I protested. "It's dangerous." He didn't even pause to acknowledge me. Moments later, the door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of our home. For a brief moment, I felt relief. But that relief was quickly overshadowed by unease. His obsession with the smoothie wasn't just peculiar, it was terrifying. The rain pounded harder against the windows as I stood there, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't normal. None of this was. And as much as I tried to convince myself otherwise, the truth was becoming increasingly clear. I didn't just fear the storm outside, I feared the storm brewing within my own home. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, with icy rain battering the windows and a bone-chilling wind howling through the cracks. Yet Arsalan had gone out in such weather, for bananas. As absurd as it was, the thought left me with a sinking feeling. My unease wasn't about his health or safety, it was the knowledge of what would follow. The bananas weren't for a snack, They were for his nightly ritual, a ritual that left me exhausted and yearning for an escape. I sank into a chair, my head falling into my hands. What was I supposed to do? Every night since our wedding had been the same. 2 weeks had passed and I hadn't experienced a single moment of restful sleep. The days were no better, with household chores demanding all my energy. My body and mind screamed for a reprieve, but Arsalan's relentless demands left no room for my needs. I was lost in thought when my sister-in-law walked in, her bright demeanor grating against my misery. "Why do you look so worried?" she asked cheerfully. "You've only just gotten married. You should be happy." I glanced at her, unable to muster a response. How could I explain that I hadn't had a peaceful moment since my wedding, that my nights were filled with unbearable strain, and my days offered no solace? These were thoughts I kept locked inside, far too personal to share. I forced a weak smile as she sat beside me, chattering about trivial things. But my mind wasn't on her. It was on Arsalan, his obsession with that smoothie, his disregard for my exhaustion, and the toll it was taking on me. Not long after, the front door burst open and Arsalan entered. He was drenched, his clothes plastered to his skin from the torrential rain. He looked worse for wear, and my sister-in-law immediately questioned him. "Why would you go out in weather like this?" she scolded. "You're soaked to the bone." He held up a plastic bag, triumphant despite his bedraggled appearance. "We were out of bananas," he said simply, as though that justified risking his health. My sister-in-law burst into laughter, shaking her head in disbelief. "Seriously? Bananas? You risked your life for bananas?" Her teasing turned playful as she added, "Don't tell me Bobby asked for them." Her words made me freeze. I lowered my head, letting my hair fall over my face to hide my reaction. If only she knew how far I was from making such a request. The very idea was absurd, especially today, when exhaustion weighed heavily on my entire being. All I wanted was to sleep, but knowing Arsalan, that simple wish would remain unfulfilled. Arsalan ignored her teasing, turning his attention to me. "Make my smoothie," he ordered. "I'll take care of the rest." I nodded mechanically, forcing my body to comply despite my inner turmoil. As he left the house again, I couldn't help but wonder what he was up to now. His erratic behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to understand. I dialed his number after some time, but it went straight to voicemail. My unease grew as the minutes stretched into an hour. When he finally returned, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was his aunt, whom I hadn't seen before. "She's new to the city," he explained. "She hasn't had a chance to visit, so I brought her along to meet you and spend some time with us." I greeted her politely, suppressing my exhaustion as best I could. After a brief conversation, I excused myself to the kitchen to prepare tea. Arsalan followed me, offering to help. As he moved around with surprising energy, I couldn't help but observe him. At 55, Arsalan didn't look his age. His movements were fluid, his strength undeniable, and his demeanor exuded vitality. It was one of the reasons I had been drawn to him initially, but now that same energy felt like a curse, a reminder of the constant demands he placed on me. One thing that puzzled me was how no one in the family referred to him as brother. Even his siblings called him by name. A subtle yet strange detail I hadn't paid much attention to before. It added to the enigma that was Arsalan. He caught me staring and smirked. "Don't look at me like that," he said, his tone teasing, yet commanding. "Save those sweet looks for tonight. I'll need them." Leaning closer, his voice dropped to a whisper. "And don't try to make excuses this time. I won't hear any complaints about being tired or unwell." His words sent a shiver down my spine, their meaning unmistakable. Before I could respond, he left the kitchen, leaving me to grapple with my own emotions. I leaned against the counter, my breathing heavy as dread began to settle in once more. The mere thought of the night ahead was enough to make my stomach churn. How much longer could I endure this? As the hours crept closer to night, I found myself praying silently, hoping against hope that somehow tonight would be different, that I'd be spared. But deep down, I knew better. No prayer or plea could rewrite what fate had already scripted. What was destined to happen would happen, no matter how desperately I wished otherwise. It was around 7 in the evening when my mother-in-law's voice broke my train of thought. "Go set the table for dinner," she said casually. Her words sent a chill through me. Dinner being served early only meant one thing: an early retreat to the bedroom. And an early retreat to the bedroom meant my thoughts stopped abruptly, my stomach knotting with dread. I lowered my head into my hands, trying to steady my breathing, but my fear must have shown on my face. "What's wrong, dear?" my mother-in-law asked, her tone filled with concern. "Is your head hurting?" Startled, I quickly shook my head. No, I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile to hide the turmoil inside. I chastised myself silently. How could I be so careless? First my sister-in-law earlier in the day, and now my mother-in-law. Both had noticed my distress. I had to be better at concealing my emotions. No one could know the truth. During dinner, my husband's eyes never left me. His gaze was tender, loving even, but it made swallowing every bite an ordeal. 2 weeks of marriage, and I still couldn't adjust to the way his presence consumed me. Every evening brought a fresh wave of fear, and every night I was left more drained than the last. His attention made my skin crawl, yet he seemed completely oblivious to my discomfort. His smile, though soft, carried an unspoken promise of the night ahead, a promise that left me feeling powerless. When my marriage was first proposed, I had vehemently refused. The thought of marrying a man 30 years older than me, simply because he was wealthy, was repulsive. A lifetime with someone for their money? What about my other needs? I had argued. A woman's biggest need is the respect and care her husband provides. Can a man of 55 truly fulfill that? But my protests had fallen on deaf ears, and when I finally married Arsalan, I realized how naive I had been. Respect and care weren't the issue. The issue was his overwhelming presence and the way he took control of every aspect of my life, especially at night. The first time he drank that smoothie, I had laughed it off. "This won't do anything," I had teased, dismissing it as a gimmick. But I stopped laughing when I saw its effects. Arsalan didn't need the smoothie to be powerful, but with it, he became unstoppable. That night, I had begged him for mercy, but my pleas only seemed to spur him on. Just yesterday, I had confided in a friend about my struggles. She had mocked me at first. "Your life must be so dull," she had said. "A 55-year-old man? He probably can't even meet your needs." Her words had stung, and I had lashed out, telling her everything. By the time I finished, her mouth hung open in shock. "You're joking," she said, disbelief written all over her face. "I'm not," I replied firmly. "Not a single word of this is a lie." For a moment, she was speechless. Then, almost breathless, she asked, "What's in that smoothie? You have to tell me." I had laughed at her sudden curiosity, realizing that the problem she was accusing my husband of was actually her own. Smiling, I wrote down the recipe and handed it to her. The next day, she called me in a panic. "I made a huge mistake," she confessed. "I gave it to my husband, and now I don't know how to handle him." It worked too well. Her admission had made me laugh, but now, as the night dragged on, I couldn't find any humor in my own situation. The hours ticked by, and my anxiety grew with each passing moment. At 10 p.m., the family was still gathered in the living room, chatting and laughing. Arsalan's aunt was staying with us, and my mother-in-law had insisted on giving her extra attention. Secretly, I was grateful for the delay. Every minute spent in the company of others was a minute spared from the inevitable. Another hour passed before Arsalan's aunt finally announced she was tired. "We'll continue tomorrow," she said, bringing the gathering to an end. Her words sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I glanced at Arsalan, who was already looking at me, his smile tinged with a knowing anticipation. I retreated to our bedroom, only to be greeted by a sight that made my heart sink further. The room was meticulously decorated, rose petals scattered across the bed, candles flickering softly, their warm light dancing on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers and something else: expectation. I stood frozen, unable to process how he had managed to prepare all of this without my noticing. When he entered, his eyes sparkled with mischief. He walked over, pinched my cheek playfully, and said, "What do you think? I wanted to surprise you." I could barely respond, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But before I could speak, he leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And tonight," he said, his tone both tender and commanding. "No excuses. No, I'm tired or I don't feel well. Tonight is ours." He walked out of the room, leaving me trembling. I clutched the edge of the dresser, my breaths coming in shallow gasps. The night loomed over me, a dark promise I couldn't avoid. The dim glow of the evening filled the room as I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Arsalan, my husband, had prepared yet another glass of his infamous smoothie, the concoction that had become his nightly obsession. He had asked me to fetch it from the kitchen, but exhaustion held me back. "I can't," I said, barely able to lift my head. "You go get it yourself." For a moment, his expression darkened, his piercing gaze making me second-guess my refusal. But then he smiled, an eerie, unsettling smile, and walked out of the room. I sank back onto the bed, my body heavy with dread. Tonight, once again, I would have to endure the ordeal that had become my nightly reality. 15 minutes passed, and Arsalan had not returned. This was unusual. Normally, he would fetch the glass and be back within moments. As more time ticked by, I became uneasy. I sat up, staring at the door, debating whether to investigate. The thought of confronting him while he was angry filled me with dread, but his prolonged absence was even more concerning. Suddenly, a loud shout from the lounge jolted me. My heart raced as I rushed to see what was happening. There I found Arsalan in a rage, yelling at the top of his lungs. His voice echoed through the house as he demanded, "Who touched my smoothie? Who took the glass I prepared? And who opened the pitcher in the cupboard?" My mother-in-law rushed forward, placing a hand on his shoulder in an attempt to calm him. "Why are you so angry, son? It's just a glass of juice," she said soothingly. Arsalan shook his head furiously. "Just a glass of juice?" he repeated, his voice rising. "To you, maybe, but to me it's everything. I need to know who took it." His desperation silenced everyone in the room. No one dared to speak. Even my mother-in-law, who often had the last word in family matters, seemed at a loss. The commotion brought Arsalan's aunt out of her room. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking around at the tense faces. "Why all this shouting?" Her arrival seemed to snap Arsalan out of his frenzy. For the first time, he realized how his outburst must have appeared to the others, especially to the guest in our home. Lowering his gaze, he muttered an apology. "It's nothing, Aunt," he said, his tone subdued. "They've just been frustrating me." "But what happened?" she pressed. "What's got you so worked up?" Arsalan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I had prepared a glass of my nightly smoothie," he explained. "I drink it every night before bed. Without it, I can't sleep. But when I went to get it, it was gone." His aunt listened carefully, then slapped her forehead with realization. "Oh dear," she said, her voice filled with regret. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know it was yours. I saw it in the fridge and thought it was just regular juice. I shared it with my husband. You know how I can't resist trying things?" The room fell silent as her words sank in. My throat tightened, and I coughed to stifle the laughter threatening to escape. If it had just been her, it wouldn't have been so bad. But now her husband had also consumed the smoothie, unknowingly becoming part of this bizarre situation. My mind spun with the implications. I could already picture her husband's reaction later that night. The thought made my shoulders shake with suppressed laughter. I lowered my head, trying to hide my amusement from the others, but it was too late. A chuckle escaped my lips. Arsalan stood frozen, staring at his aunt. Then, after a moment, he sighed heavily. "It's fine, Aunt," he said, his tone resigned. "Just be careful tonight." His words pushed me over the edge. Unable to contain myself, I burst into laughter. The sound filled the room, drawing puzzled looks from everyone around me. "What's so funny?" my mother-in-law asked, frowning. "What are you hiding?" "I'm sorry," I managed between laughs, wiping tears from my eyes. "It's nothing. Just nothing." I excused myself quickly and retreated to the bedroom, leaving the others to their confusion. Once inside, I let the laughter bubble over again, the sheer absurdity of the situation too much to handle. Arsalan joined me a while later. His expression was calm, but I could tell he was still irritated by the night's events. He closed the door behind him and sat on the edge of the bed, his energy undiminished despite missing his smoothie. "You don't need the juice," I teased, unable to resist. "You're already stronger than 3 or 4 men put together." He smirked, leaning closer. "That may be true," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "but you still have to keep up." The weight of his words settled over me, and the laughter from earlier faded into the background. Once again, I was reminded that, juice or not, Arsalan was an unstoppable force in my life, one I wasn't sure I could keep up with. As I was preparing lunch, my phone rang. It was my mother calling to tell me that my brother, who had been working in Saudi Arabia, was finally coming home after 4 years. She asked me to visit and join the family for the celebration. Excited, I relayed the news to Arsalan, expecting him to share in my enthusiasm. Instead, he smirked and said, "Tell your sisters to have bananas and chickpeas ready. Only then will I agree to bring you." His teasing tone made me laugh. My sister, who was on the phone with me, overheard and asked, "What's this about bananas and chickpeas?" Still laughing, I reassured her, "Don't worry, I'll explain it all when I see you. But trust me, once you know, you'll swear never to bring it up again." Her curiosity was relentless, and I could tell she wouldn't let it go easily. Recently married herself, she was desperate for insights into married life. That gave me an idea. I decided I would share the smoothie recipe with the women in my family the next day. If it could help resolve any frustrations they had with their husbands, why not? When I mentioned my plan to Arsalan, he laughed heartily. "They'll curse you for it later," he said. "Just wait." "I don't care," I replied with a grin. "I'm telling them." Later that evening, we arrived at my parents' house where my mother greeted us warmly. The house was buzzing with energy, and everyone was preparing for the big family dinner to celebrate my brother's return. The work kept me busy, and by nightfall, I was utterly exhausted. Even so, Arsalan's watchful eyes never left me. I knew exactly what he was thinking, and for once, I didn't want to deny him. When we finally retired to our room, Arsalan took my hand, his touch reassuring. "Don't worry," he said. "Tonight is the last night. After this, my 15-day course will be complete, and I'll finally be cured." His words brought clarity to the situation. For weeks, Arsalan had been drinking the smoothie, a herbal remedy prescribed by a traditional healer to treat a condition that had left him temporarily infertile. The mixture was meant to restore his vitality, and from what I could tell, it was working. A month later, my suspicions were confirmed. I was pregnant. The news filled Arsalan with joy, and his entire demeanor shifted. He became attentive, ensuring I had everything I needed, from nutritious food to plenty of rest. The doctor had emphasized the importance of sleep for a healthy pregnancy, and Arsalan took her advice to heart. Gone were the nights of endless demands. Instead, he prioritized my well-being above all else. As I prepared for the arrival of our child, I couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind of the past few months. The struggles and exhaustion had been overwhelming, but they had led to a deeper understanding between Arsalan and me. And in the end, as I held my growing belly, I realized that the difficulty had paved the way for a newfound peace. Indeed, after hardship, there is ease.